Welcome to Life in Real Estate. I'm here with Kristen Wolfram. Kristen practices family law in Michigan. And today we're going to talk about single partners that are moving in together who are planning to get married. We did a podcast previously that talked about singles who are moving in together. One owns the house, one doesn't. This one is one owns the house, you're moving in together and planning to get married. Believe it or not, things change a little bit there, right? When it comes to real estate.
Yeah, so the property would be considered premarital property for the partner who owns it before the marriage.
Okay.
And anytime that we talk about marriage, there's sort of a situation, right? There's people who have prenuptial agreements and people who do not. If you do not have a prenuptial agreement, and obviously there's a lot of I don't know what to say, some thoughts. People have thoughts about prenuptial agreements,
right? Good or bad,
right? But the truth of the matter is, even if you don't have a prenuptial agreement, you technically have a prenuptial agreement to do whatever the law is going to essentially default to, right? So there's a number of things that we have as not necessarily default. It's not always going to be that case, but we have principles under the law that every case is going to follow. Every case that does not have a prenup follows. Okay. So in other words, a prenuptial agreement is an agreement between the parties about how they would divide their estate, their marital estate, their assets and debts in the instance of a divorce. And if you do not have that prenuptial agreement, then you're going to be dividing it with along the principles of whatever the state has decided, right?
That's kind of, those are traditional type of standards. I mean, yeah, they vary a little, but like you said, they're pretty standard.
That's right. They would be standard. Now, when I say standard, they're always altered by the fact that, at least in Michigan, marital assets are divided equitably. What that means is up to the particular judge and the facts and circumstances of the parties. But I just wanted to make it clear that there's prenuptial agreements and there's not like sort of, we're not going to do a prenup. Like, you already have one. It's just whatever the law already is.
Got it.
Right.
Okay.
So that said, if one partner owns the home, that home would be considered premarital property for that person. And things change a little bit, like if the person has owned it for a long period of time and there's a substantial asset, if they've owned it for a shorter period of time and it's a smaller asset, it can, premarital property can sort of also be affected by how long the marriage lasts, whether there are children, lots of other things. But if you are moving into a home and or getting married to someone who already owns a home, even if you later become an owner of that home in various ways, or through various methods, you will there will be a portion that can be claimed by the other party as premarital.
Okay. And so you've moved in together and you're going to get married. What would you suggest each party does or they do together to protect their asset together and then individually in case something happens down the road?
Sure. To start with the person who owns the home and, well, the other person, everybody should understand that the value accumulated prior to the marriage is what the premarital asset would be. So if I own the home outright, its whole value at the time of our marriage. Okay. If I have a mortgage on it, it's the amount of the equity in my home that I have before we get married. So, if it's a $200,000 home and it's owned outright, then the value is $200,000. If by the time you get divorced, it's a $500,000 home, there's an increase of value of $300,000, regardless of what you do. So no prenuptial situation. The law is going to divide it how it stands. You're going to divide $300,000, not $500,000.
So even though it's considered a premarital asset, that changes when you're married?
Yeah, it's not. So there's a premarital portion reserved, right? Okay. That person can claim they don't have to, but they have the ability and typically do claim that I'll have the premarital portion. But the default under the law is that the other party is entitled to 50% of the increase in value.
Okay.
So that would mean that. So, and we date that at the time of marriage, regardless of whether or not you're placed on the mortgage, regardless of whether or not you're placed on the deed. It's the marriage that changes your sort of interest in that real estate, even if that's not something that's like registered in the register of deeds.
Oh, okay. So let's say you don't do a prenup and you get married and for some reason you don't change
Don't
the
change the mortgage.
responsibility of the mortgage or the deed,
Correct.
what happens
Um,
if something goes wrong?
Yeah. So again, depending on how long and the circumstances, but the base minimum is you start at the date of marriage, the value at the date of marriage, the increase to or decrease of value to the date of divorce, and divide that.
Okay.
And that is, yep, regardless of whether or not the mortgage changes or whether or not
the deed or
deed.
not.
And a lot of people, I had a case one time where the client was absolutely adamant that they had paid every mortgage payment, they had paid all the taxes, and essentially paid every dime into that home without the contribution of the other party. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter at all. The law presumes that during the course of the marriage, you achieved some, benefit to each other by being married, and regardless of whether you can prove by meticulous record keeping that you are 100% responsible for all of the payments made. Once you were married, you share that value with your spouse.
So I think what maybe a lot of people don't know is that even when you're married, even if the other person isn't on the deed, isn't on the mortgage, it will default in Michigan to an equitable situation if you ever divorce.
That's right. It becomes
So
marital
it doesn't
property.
totally protect you. You don't still get to keep all of that
No.
just because you never added that person to your deed or mortgage. And I think that's a really important point.
It is.
My experience, I've been through this with a couple clients. They didn't understand that.
It is a big misconception. People don't realize that that if I didn't put you on the deed, or if I didn't refinance and put you on the mortgage or something like that, that it somehow is protected. And it is absolutely not. It is marital property regardless.
Okay. What would you suggest? So, the situation again is you're two single people, you plan to get married, one already owns the home. What if, do you have any suggestions if they decide to move in together prior to the marriage? Let's say you're moving in with your partner, but you're not getting married for a year. Is there an interim step
Sure.
that would be helpful?
Sure. You can always have the kind of agreement that we talked about in the other episode. You can either have, truly in that kind of instance, something like a lease would be most appropriate. You're not going to make any contributions until after you're married. So you'd have some kind of short-term lease to say, I'm just a tenant here. I have the right to be here. I have the right to inhabit this. You will have to follow these certain rules if you want to evict me. But all I'm going to do is contribute X amount of dollars to the mortgage or to the utilities or something along those lines. You can then, or if there does need to be some improvements and things made to the home, you would want to consider doing a contract that says, for instance, if we do not get married, we separate prior to the marriage, this is going to be my take. I do want to warn though that like premarital agreements they have to follow certain guidelines and have certain things in them to protect against a presumption of fraud. And follow the case law that's very specific to prenuptial agreements.
So don't try to do one in your own.
Definitely don't try to do it on your own. And don't assume that because you have an agreement from when you were before you were married to when you were after, that it's going to that's going to be drawn through. If that agreement conflicts in some way with things that would change when you get married, there's some provisions that may not survive. And so you would want to have that reviewed again.
Okay. Anything else you would suggest for people in this particular situation?
There's a lot of things. Another client came to mind that just really important things to think about. Her previous partner had passed away, and the children of that partner had been receiving Social Security money. So even though the current parties in this case were married, everyone understood that the money that was purchasing the home was their Social Security money, and she, in this case, the female, of the couple, really was counting on that home being the stable security for her kids, who were not obviously the other partners since he had passed away. Okay. And when they divorced, she was forced to divide the equity in that home, and it would have caused her. Now, luckily, that situation worked out to where they could come to an agreement, but under the law, she would have been incredibly destabilized by having to pay him out. And a lot of people, she was definitely of the mindset that money was they all understood that was the children's money, and that he wouldn't take that from, but he absolutely did, and received quite a payout, and would have received a bigger payout had we had to go to court and it had not settled. So I guess I tell that story to say, even in the most extreme circumstances, even when you are married, you have to consider that anytime, like when you are married, that becomes a marital asset. So if one party wants to preserve it, either for children or for themselves in any way, I think it always behooves them to come up with some kind of equitable resolution ahead of time, so that, again, you're not doing that at the end, when people are not getting along,
Right.
but determining what would be equitable in the beginning, so that, and does it cut down every problem? No, people are still going to go to court on every agreement if it doesn't turn out 15 years down the line, but at least everyone would be under some understanding. And then I guess now that I say it, there's one more thing, which is to refresh it every couple of years, readdress
you
that.
probably kind of forget about that though, right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think the other thing is there are so many assumptions you make,
Mhm.
and those assumptions are what can cause so much heartache and pain and money at the end if things don't go well, that it's worth looking at these things up front and dealing with them then. And then, like you said, I mean, yeah, even if you're in a 25-year marriage, looking at this stuff every few years and make sure that everyone's still in agreement with that, because we can't make assumptions.
No, you can't. And I know we're going to talk about, I know we planned anyway to talk about some of these individual situations kind of more in depth in the future, but usually when they're separating from one household to two households, or, in other words, one party is going their own way, it can be really, really destabilizing for the person, right? Where
Absolutely.
depending on what market, what the market looks like, and depending on how, like, whether a person has stayed home for some time and perhaps they need to try to get financing on their own for the first time, and after many years of either not working or working part-time or having to care for children in addition to working and things like that. Without having that agreement ahead of time, that makes it your first goal, that the first thing that you have to do, the first thing that when clients call me, I say, okay, well, where's everyone going to live? Because somebody's about to be homeless.
Right.
And that's a huge hurdle to overcome, where if you end up having to end a relationship in some fashion, you would have that base covered, or at least you'd have a starting point to work from.
And I think maybe our next episode leading into that will be, how's that? Will be to talk about specific examples of your clients, my clients, because we've both had many situations where this has come up. And this is one reason I started the podcast, because a lot of people are so unaware and make so many assumptions until they're in the middle of something that they had no intention of ever being in. All right. So I look forward to the next one.
Excellent.
Thank you.